Hi, welcome back. I was planning to make today's video a comparison between Acheron and Aglaia, but while looking up showcases of both units in the newest content, I noticed something that honestly quite pissed me off. Now don't worry, the Acheron vs Aglaia video is coming up probably tomorrow or the day after, but for now I want to talk about enemy and level design in Honkai Star Rail, and specifically in the MoC. It's probably the endgame mode that's in the worst spot right now. It used to be super fun for me, but now I feel like it's more of just a chore that exists for Jades, and I believe it could be so much better. It's a simple mode, and it should be a simple mode as the standard endgame mode, but I think it's way too simple right now and there's a bunch of issues with it. So let's talk about why the MoC in Honkai Star Rail really sucks right now. Before we start, you should like, comment, and subscribe for more content like this in the future, and join the Express Train Discord server for a fun community all about video games and anime. The content creator group from the Express Train Discord will be making a podcast about general gacha topics, and either tomorrow or in a couple of days we're dropping the pilot episode, so keep a lookout for that one. Now enough yapping and let's get on to it. Now the biggest issue with the design of the MoC is quite simple and very obvious. Every single MoC stage is just hit the enemies until they die. Now that may sound like every single game mode in every single game ever when you first think about it, but if you think a little more you notice that there are absolutely zero gimmicks when it comes to any boss or elite enemy. Except like the Soul-Glad Gorilla Elite, which is the worst one because f you if you don't have Aventurine. While the 3.0 and 3.1 MoCs will have a boss with a neat gimmick that every single character could take advantage of, it still boils down to just hit it until it dies. This is of course a problem because it shows that the devs are incredibly lazy. The only way they are increasing difficulty in the MoC is by increasing enemy HP. In the current Apocalyptic Shadow, the Fantalia's second half has almost 0 HP increase from when the last time she was in rotation, and yet without the right teams, she is still pretty difficult because she isn't made artificially difficult but mechanically, even though her mechanics are definitely a lot simpler than other bosses like the Dino Monkey and the Aventurine boss, but she's still a lot of fun. And not to mention the big buck, but that thing is less fun overall because if you don't have Herda, Yunli, and Boot Hill, you're most likely not going to be able to beat it. I was advocating for Jingli in my Apoc Shadow guide, but she sucked when I used her, not gonna lie. When you take a look at 99% of MoC bosses, all of them are just HP sponges that you have to do big damage enough to, and when you look at the big boss in the 3.0 MoC, while it does have the mechanic of destroying the big Soul Stealer spears it spawns, you are indeed forced to kill them, which kinda sucks for anyone rocking a single target team, because you'll need a largely AoE team like Acheron and Herda to kill it quickly enough. There's nothing wrong with having a gimmick AoE characters can take advantage of, but when a single target unit needs to deal 4.5 million HP in the MoC of all endgame modes to be able to actually kill the boss, it's kinda insane. Again, just hit it until it dies stuff. Now, this boss is definitely gonna be way more fun than any other MoC cycle, and so will the 3.1 boss, but if these bosses were put in the Apocalyptic Shadow, they'd be incredibly disappointing. The standard that Apoc Shadow has for boss gimmicks and mechanics is pretty high compared to anything else, and if these two were introduced, their mechanics would be lacking compared to every other boss. Even the Sunday boss, who is collectively agreed upon to be the worst boss in the whole game except by Rapamains. I can go on and on about why MoC enemies are just HP sponges, but I really don't have to. Just take a look at the past like 10 MoC cycles and tell me which enemy was actually fun to face, rather than just a board you had to throw enough darts on. Now I get that the MoC isn't supposed to be that mechanically heavy and is mostly just a DPS check endgame mode, but DPS check endgame modes are just not that fun, especially when the game is suffering from an HP inflation issue. Just take a look at Genshin Spiral Abyss. Not only are the enemies mostly HP sponges, but there are like 30 examples of bosses that are frequently put in the Abyss that stall so much and waste your time so much because you can't deal damage to them in some phases. It's basically the same thing in Star Rail, except you can deal damage, but the damage that most players are going to do unless they have the newest shiniest character is very disappointing. A DOT player returning from 2.0 to the game, excited to try out the endgame modes again, would be incredibly disappointed when they find out that DOT absolutely sucks, and even though it can clear the current Svarog, it still takes a while, and DOT can forget about ever trying to clear the 3.0 MoC. However, when you take a look at the Apocalyptic Shadow, almost every single time there is a wind and lightning weakness, and it's accompanied by a choice of a DOT buff that DOT players can take advantage of. That is the biggest difference between the Apocalyptic Shadow and the MoC, the fact that you can choose between 3 different buffs to be able to buff up 3 or even more different archetypes depending on who you have. Now, while they can pick and choose what buffs to put, it's still not as restrictive as the MoC. In the MoC, you're just forced to make do with whatever the one buff is that the current cycle provides, and this cycle specifically showed why that system is kinda trash. As we know, the 2.7 MoC had Trotters as the cycle buff, and while they're great for AoE units, they suck balls for single target units. My first try with my friend's Fei Xiao took 9 cycles to clear Svarog, while my Dakaran team took me 4 cycles to clear. While that's just an anecdote, the difference is absolutely crazy, especially when my friend's Fei Xiao was clearing faster than my Dakaran team consistently in the previous MoC rotation. If you could pick and choose the buffs in the MoC like you could in the Apocalyptic Shadow, I think HP inflation would be a much smaller issue. Pure Fiction also has the buffing system and it's pretty good, but Pure Fiction is kinda incredibly boring anyway, so it doesn't matter, not gonna lie. Now, versatility in what you can and can't choose to beat the endgame content is incredibly important, and in the MoC the field is very narrow compared to the Apocalyptic Shadow. While catering the MoC cycles to the new characters isn't necessarily a bad thing and is just marketing 101, when it's done so heavily like Star does it to the point where it's getting really annoying, and the only difference between 2 skill damage based ice DPS units is the amount of damage they do, with the newer unit being obviously better, it gets kinda annoying to just pull for the new unit over and over and over again to be able to beat the new content in a timely manner. Even though Jingliu can still clear, she will never be as good as Herda. A low investment Herda team is doing bigger damage than E2S1 Jingliu at high investment. Now, HP inflation has been talked about a bunch, but I feel like a lot of people are talking about the whole of Star Rail when they talk about it, because the MoC is definitely the most played endgame mode. Not only because it's unlocked very early in the game, but also because it's very simple. As we said though, being so simple that the gameplay is just hit them until they die becomes very boring. The Apocalyptic Shadow is so much more fun. I think the only flaw it has is how insanely powerful Ruan Mei is, so much so that she's almost a requirement. But I've definitely seen many APS clears that don't contain Ruan Mei. Fixing MoC is incredibly simple because it's just a simple problem of terrible, boring enemy design, and when MoC is fixed, it would also make Apocalyptic Shadow even better. Hear me out, if the bosses in the game by default have some cool mechanics and gimmicks, when they're put into the MoC, these mechanics are further capitalized upon by the elites in the level or the current cycle buff, and it'll make the MoC so much better. When you take enemies from a game mode so simple, but would be so effective that they made better enemy design, and then put these enemies into a slightly more complicated mode that is all about boss mechanics, then their mechanics will become even more complicated, and that is definitely a good thing. Complicated doesn't mean more difficult, it just means you have to think more, and in a game like Star Rail, where thinking is less important than the credits you have in your bank account, we definitely need some more of it. I think this, along with a skip button, would solve 99% of Honkai Star Rail's issues, so I'd love to see it implemented. A yappy story isn't really that bad when you have a skip button, and lots of HP isn't bad when there are mechanics that older units can take advantage of to keep the HP seemingly low. I'm sorry to bring this topic up again, but I really thought I should talk about it when I noticed it. So thank you for watching, like, comment, and subscribe for more content like this in the future, and join the Expressway Discord server for a lovely community to hang out with. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you next time.